Hi guys, welcome back to Scalemotor. Today we're continuing with the Tamiya CBR1000RR-R. We're focusing on the exhaust today. All I'm doing here is just getting two of the downpipes connected, and I'm just placing them where they need to go, holding them together, getting the Tamiya extra thin, and just running it along the seam where the two parts join. The capillary action will pull the glue in and it'll start bonding. Once you've gone along the whole seam, give it a squeeze, and what will happen is you'll get a little molten kind of bead of plastic come out of the join, and then once that's all dry, you can use a hobby knife or a sander just to scrape that away, and you should be left with a nice seam. We're just moving on to the second part of the exhaust now. It's exactly the same as the first, just hold them together, run a bit of glue along the seam, give them a squeeze, wait for it to dry, and then once it's dry you just clean it up and get rid of that bead of molten plastic. You'll see I'm rubbing my fingers together quite often, and that's just to get rid of any excess glue which may have gotten on my hands, because otherwise I'll end up picking up a part and I'll leave a nice big gluey thumbprint. Because the Tamiya extra thin does melt the plastic, that will be a nightmare to remove. At least that's what the word on the street is, because I've never done it, I promise. Next up, we're just going to grab some XF1. This is flat black from Tamiya. What we're going to be using this for is just to get the inside of the exhaust pipe, because these are quite easily missed. So I'm just going to get the edges. You don't have to go all the way down, just so there's a little bit of colour in there. So when you do look down, you can see that it's black. It's flat black because I don't know if you've ever looked into an exhaust tip on a motorbike, but it's always very sooty, and that's just a result of the exhaust gases and combustion gases burning. But this doesn't have to be done. It's not imperative, but it's just a little bit of attention to detail, and I think the little tiny things like this do really help set off a model. Now we've got that painted, all we're going to do is stick the two halves together, and it's going to be the same process as before. Just make sure everything lines up, always test fit, and then run a little bit of the Tamiya extra thin along the seams. You can see with this the end wanted to flare a little. I'm not sure if that's because of my poor processing when I was cutting bits off, just to kind of get it off the sprue and cleaning the part up. However, a little bit of glue to hold it down the bottom, and then a little bit of glue up the end, which was causing the problem, and it's all fixed. Again, with this we're just going to run the glue along the seam, give it a little squeeze, and wait for that kind of little bead of glue to come out, and once it's dry we'll come in and then either get rid of it with a craft knife or the sanders. So next up we're just going to work on the slip-on, the can, or whatever you like to call it. This was moulded in one piece, which is great because there's no seam lines we have to worry about when So when it's been glued together, the only thing we had to worry about was the two little sprue locator points on the bottom, but they were easy enough to remove with the UMP sanders. The actual tip is 3 separate parts. There's a bit which slides in first, which helps locate the other parts. Then you've got the exhaust tip, and then the shroud which goes around the tip. Easy enough to put together. Pop this in. You can't push this too far because there's locating points, so that's great. Pop it in, bit of glue, give it a little push, and you don't have to worry about any cleanup of any like glue marks because that part's not going to get seen. Then you connect the tip to the shroud, pop a bit of glue in. Again, that's not going to get seen, but flip it over just to make sure the glue hasn't run through the other side, and then this will connect to the actual end can. Now there's 2 little locating points, so I've just put a dab of glue there and popped it on, and again made sure that the glue hasn't kind of seeped out, because if you miss that after you've painted, if you miss that and spot it after you've painted, then it'll be a nightmare to clean up. It goes together pretty simple. You just slide it on to the pipe at the end. There is another pipe which needs to be connected, which I'm doing here. You can see there's a little protruding bit of plastic on that pipe, and that's just to make sure that this extra bit goes on in the correct orientation. So there's only one way it can go on, and it makes sure that the pipe is in the perfect position to connect to the actual end can. Now we're just going to do a little bit of cleanup on the pipes to get rid of some of the seams where it was glued. It's super simple. Just rub over with a UMP sponge sander or sanders of your choice, and then hit it with the buffer. If you're using the UMP one, it's the blue side first, then the white side, and it'll come out looking good as new. And you may still see the seam line, but that's not a problem. Once it's painted, it'll be pretty much invisible. So I'm just testing the other parts for the exhaust. I believe that bit on top was the servo for the butterfly valve, which changes depending on the RPM. The servo will move and it'll kind of change the exhaust characteristics to give you more or less torque depending on where you are in the rev range. And then we're just going back in with the sanders just to make sure everything's nice and clean. Once you're done sanding, you can use your nail to go over the seam, and if it feels kind of like one continuous piece of plastic, then you should be good to go. Okay, now we're just going to get into some priming. Again, I'm using the UMP white primer. Always make sure to thoroughly shake the primer, just to make sure it's all mixed and ready to go. There we go, just testing the flow, and as we've been doing in all the videos so far, just lightly build up the layers. The first one, you want to do a nice thin one, just to make sure you get into kind of all the nooks and crannies, and then slowly build up the paint layers. This exhaust was a bit of a nightmare to paint just because of the shapes and angles. Some parts you may see I had to get in quite close and just kind of very, very, very lightly dust it on. But once you come to add in the chrome later, if you do miss bits like that at the early stages, they are really, really noticeable. after priming, my camera unfortunately didn't record me doing the gloss black base. However, it's just the same as I've been doing in previous videos, just a nice glossy LP1. And then we can move on to the Alclad Metallics. We're using gold titanium here. The colour this gives is absolutely amazing, and it is really, really close to the actual colour of this exhaust tip. Being Alclad, you want to spray it thin. You do a very, very thin layer to start with, and then slowly build it up until you get the colour you're looking for. While you're painting on the gold titanium, you may notice that it looks very, very silvery. That's not a problem, don't worry, it just looks like that while it's drying. Once it's all dry and it's all built up to the thickness you want, it will have a nice gold tint to it. There was a little part on the main exhaust pipe which needed to be painted in titanium gold, so rather than mask it off, I just thought I'd hit it very, very lightly with the airbrush, and when it comes to putting the chrome over the top, just go a little bit lighter over the area, so hopefully a bit of that titanium gold will show through. So as you can see here, we've built up that titanium gold, and it is starting to look a lot more like titanium gold rather than a chromy silver colour. I think we're on the 4th coat of paint here. You can keep going if you want, it will start to get a little bit golder, but you carry on and you risk losing that glossy shine. Next up, we're using the Alclad Chrome, and we're going to use this to paint the exhaust pipes. Same as usual with Alclad, absolutely amazing over a gloss black base, but very, very slowly build up the layers. I started up the back end just because that part is not going to be seen, and I just wanted to make sure I got my flow rate correct. But like I said, these pipes are a bit of a nightmare to paint because they've got so many kind of nooks, crannies, crevices, sneaky areas. So you've got to be patient and make sure that you do get in all those little areas, otherwise it will be really, really noticeable. Okay, so I think we're on our 4th and final coat of the Alclad now, and as you can see, building it up slowly really does pay off because you do get that nice shiny glossy finish. You can still get a shiny finish without the gloss black base, but it doesn't look as deep as it does with the glossy base. And here we are, here's the finished exhaust tip and slip-on. And then it is next to the finished pipes. Next up, we're going to be heat staining the exhaust. With this, I'll be using X23, X27 and LP69. I'm just going to throw the clear red across the table just to make sure it's nice and shook up. So to start off, what you want to do is what I've done here, you don't have to do this, but I'm turning around the needle guard on my airbrush just so I can see the needle and just so I can get really close and see exactly how much paint is coming out. I'm just going to also take off the back of the airbrush and then go in and change the trigger tension. This is something I like to do when I'm trying to do very, very, very delicate work, or I also like to do this with Alclad. Like I said in the previous video, super simple. You take the back of the airbrush off, you tighten this up for more tension at the trigger and loosen it for less tension at the trigger. Then just pop the back on and away you go. So first up, we're going to be using the LP69 clear yellow. It doesn't have to be LP, you can use the acrylic if you like I've got the acrylics for the others. But we are thinning it down quite a lot. I'm using the lacquer thinner with retarder from Tamiya, and I've done about 1 millimeter of thinner to literally 3 or 4 drops of the LP69. This will make the paint nice and thin, so when it comes out of the airbrush at the lower pressure, because we are going to be dropping out pressure, I don't have any kind of specific numbers for you at the moment because I'm using an old kind of Chinese electronic compressor, and it's just got a knob on the side which you twist. So I've loosened that off, got the pressure nice and low, and that's why you can see in the background I've been testing the flow quite a lot. But we want it to come out with as little as possible paint, but still with a nice clean kind of flow, because if the paint is too thick when you try this with the lower pressure, it'll just come out and it'll blob and it'll spit, and that's not what we're looking for. The way the heat staining works on exhausts is you'll normally see the bluer colours on the hotter parts, then it'll go through to the kind of purples and reds, and then through to the more yellowy colours. So what we're doing with this yellow now is we're just trying to get the end of where the heat stain is, and then we can work our way back to the hottest colour. This way you don't get any yellow mixed in with the blue, and it'll cause a weird green colour. So next up we're using the X27 clear red, and it's thinned pretty much exactly the same, and it's the same process, but now we're just moving up slightly and just overlapping the edge of that yellow, and coming closer to the hottest parts where we'll hit with the X23, the clear blue, after the red. Okay, now we're using the X23, the clear blue, and again it is thinned exactly the same as the red and the yellow. What we're doing now is just getting the hottest parts, and we wanted to overlap that red, because that'll give a nice kind of violety purpley colour, and it ties it all together, and it'll give you a kind of nice fade from the blue all the way through to the yellow. I'd try to avoid the yellow areas with the blue, because otherwise you get a weird green colour. But here's the heat stain in. I absolutely love the way it comes out with the Alclad Chrome underneath. If you're using a different colour underneath, maybe not the Alclad Chrome, then maybe a titanium silver, you could always use that titanium silver then to come back over the top to tone down the heat staining. The problem with the Alclad is if you try and go back over, because you haven't got that nice gloss black base, it can give a kind of different chrome effect on the area you've sprayed it compared to the other parts of the exhaust, so it can sometimes look inconsistent. And what we're doing now is just putting it all together. Because of the build-up of the layers on this end of the exhaust pipe, it was a bit of a struggle getting on the slip-on. It didn't just slip on, so we had to take a sander to the paint, but not a problem because this area is going to be inside and it's not going to be seen. The only bit of this is going to be seen is that bit right down the middle, which we painted in flat black earlier on. Next up, we're using the Tamiya panel line accent colour in black, and we're just going to use this to pick out any of the low points in the mouldings on the exhaust, just to give a bit of depth. We're going to go around where the pipes connect to each other, where the slip-on connects, where that extra bit of pipe is in the middle, the seams around the catalytic converter. We're just going to pull it on. It'll go on quite thick and look quite dark, but that's not a problem because we've got our cotton bud and we're just going to use that to wick up any excess while it's still wet. You can come back then when it's dry with a cotton bud with some lighter fluid on and wipe away any excess. Now we're using the Pilot silver marker, and this is just to catch the bolt heads on the exhaust. There's not many, there's just 2 on the exhaust servo, and there's 1 where the extra little pipe connects to the main pipe. It's probably not going to be seen, but I'd hate myself if I missed them. Now we've got a couple of decals. I've got the decal that's been sitting in the warm water for about 30 seconds. What we're going to do now is get the microset down where this decal needs to go. Once that's on, we're going to peel the decal off the backing sheet, pop it on top of the microset, and then just use a cotton bud to roll and push out any moisture from underneath. There were 2 decals for the exhaust, one kind of safety information one on the back, which we're probably not going to be seen, and then the Attribution logo, which goes on the front. Now we're just going to get the exhaust on. I always like to do the front first because the screw holes are normally up the back. You'll find that if you do the screws first, you'll have to twist and tweak the front just to get it in the 4 holes. It's much easier to line it up at the front and then twist and tweak on the back. There were 2 screws holding the exhaust on. We've got 1 underneath and 1 on the passenger foot pegs at the back. I haven't used any glue or anything up the front. I don't think there's any need, and if I end up dropping this, which is highly likely because I'm that type of person, and scratch the exhaust finish or something like that, it's easy to pull it off and just give it a repaint. So there we are, we've now got the exhausts painted and on the bike. This is my favourite part of a build. I love the heat staining process on exhausts, and I think it's from this point that the build really starts to come together. There's going to be a couple of pictures here for you to have a look at of the final product, and if you've enjoyed this as much as I have, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, have a great day and stay safe.